Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. I'm Brian Calley, CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Operations at SBAM. It's great to have you here today. I do want to say a quick welcome to our new member, Justin Ayers in Grand Rapids Tech. Thanks for becoming a member, and thanks to all the new members who joined this past week. So it's been a busy week since we last met on Monday. And Brian, we invited a special guest to join you today for an in-depth discussion on all things election results.
Yeah, there's so many things that on this election last week, and we did a preview last Monday, and then now we've got the outcomes, and it was, as usual, very, very interesting. A few surprises in the election as well, and we like to, not that I can play the role of an expert sometimes, but today we have an actual expert in elections that has joined us. His name is Kyle Mullen, and also a newly minted small business owner, by the way. If you guys get our Watchdog newsletter, most of those articles are actually from Kyle's team at MIRS News. They're kind of the ultimate insiders when it comes to the what's happening on the political scene at the state level. So, Kyle, congratulations on completing an ownership transaction for MIRS News, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate it. I'm happy to be here.
Well, let's just jump right in. I'm going to start at the top of the one that the whole nation was watching, which which was the U.S. Senate race. And just as a bit of setup here, the Gary Peters, a longtime person on the political scene in Michigan politics, had made the unusual decision to retire at age 65. So just a spring chicken by U.S. Senate terms, and there was a really competitive race on the Democratic side anyway to fill that seat. So the Republicans narrowed it down to Mike Rogers. We'll come back to that in just a minute. But let's talk about this primary among the Democrats that had captivated the whole country. And if you were to, or at least anybody who's looking at control of the Senate, if you were to look at the polls, though, in the last couple of weeks, boy, you would have thought that it was going to be a runaway slam dunk election for Abdul Sayed, and he did win, but just kind of a squeaker. So if we could, let's talk a little bit about the polling itself. Were we seeing herding? Where did these go wrong? Where it just seemed like he was going to win by double digits? I think according to pretty much every poll in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, the problem, Brian, with the polling is that there are two different types of polls. And if you look at the Real Clear Politics average on these polls, there was a dearth of polling on the primary side. Polling has gotten very expensive and very difficult to do. And so some outfits try to do that kind of, I don't want to say on the cheap, but what they do is they do what's called open link polling. And this was something that I actually got thrown into the national news over because I declined to publish one of these polls because it's open to manipulation. So what it is, and not to get too far to the weeds on this, but I think people will find this interesting since you asked about the polling, is that you'll get a text message on your phone and it will say, do you want to participate in this poll? And so if you want to, you click yes, and you get to go to a link. And you can go into that link, and that's what Emerson does, that's what Mitchell does, and a lot of internal pollers or pollers who are just kind of interested in the results will do this as well. So you follow the link, and it'll just ask you some survey questions, which is great, and everybody's got their own demographics attached to a number. But what will happen, though, is that I can then now take this link and I can send it to my wife, I could send it to you, I could send it to my son, I could send it to anybody, and they can fill it out as well. And so this was a concern that as soon as I realized that this is what was happening, I said, well, I'm not very comfortable with this Because what can happen then is that somebody who supports, let's just say Abdul al-Sayed, and those voters tend to be younger and they tend to be more tech savvy and they tend to be a lot more, I don't know, very excited. They send the link around and you can get lopsided results. Now, is that what happened in this case? Is that why the polling was off? Well, if you take a look at the last polling that we got, Mitchell, Emerson, for example, that's what they did. And that was why I didn't want to use them, because they were easily manipulated. The other polling that came in were polls that were aligned with Abdul al-Sayed. And you can also make the argument, well, geez, so we were using Abdul's own internal numbers as part of this real clear politics average. And then you take a look at the one poll that wasn't an open link poll and wasn't associated with Abdul's, and that was the polling that was done by the Glenn Gariff group for the Detroit News, and it had a completely different take. It had Haley winning. But the problem with that one is that it used traditional methods that went after traditional voters who were by and large older, who were by and large female, and that came back with Haley winning. So what was the real answer? Well, the real answer is you can poll these races, but it's very expensive. Not a lot of media has it in their budget anymore. And then, so what's the benefit of doing it outside of grabbing some headlines? And so you just didn't see it. I mean, we ended up paying Epic MRA poll for a general election, but it was only a question. We still paid a lot of money for a couple questions in a general election poll. So the answer to your question on the polling is that to do it cheap and easy is subject to manipulation, and it's hard, and to do it right is very expensive, and there's not many people willing to do it.
Yeah. It's interesting that that polling has become part of it in a lot of ways. It's become part of advocacy, and part of what um, part of the overall messaging strategy, and either bolstering turnout or discouraging the other side. And there's all these different things that happen with internal polls and releasing them when you do and when you don't. But the conventional wisdom among the Republican side was that they wanted Abdul el-Sayed to win,
Yes.
thinking that it was going to perhaps make an otherwise difficult election cycle maybe a little less difficult. There's headwinds for Republicans right now. That seems pretty clear. If you're out there on the streets, you can see it, feel it, hear it. So Republicans think that el-Sayed winning is perhaps a help to them. Although when I see the crowds coming together for him, and also just because I've seen him and known him on some level for the last 10 years, that he's extremely charismatic. And so I'm wondering if Republicans are right. Does it provide a better path for Republicans, or do you think they might have that wrong?
Well, they certainly have more negatives on el-Sayed, that's for sure. They have policy positions and they have his own words. You probably saw over the weekend their latest gimmick was to take something that he said when he visited Mackinac Island for the policy conference, where he said, "Oh, I hate Mackinac. Why do I come here?" And then use that as, I guess, a hammer to go after him and say, "Hey, what kind of Michigander is he that he doesn't like Mackinac Island?" And, made that a thing. So I think they just had more negatives on him, Brian, to be honest, than Haley does. I think Haley just generates just your standard Democratic vote that would have been harder to fight against, where I think Abdul, there's just a lot of material against him. But the downside on that is that you're right. Abdul is extremely engaging. He's very personable, and he's very likable, like one-on-one, or even in small or large groups. I mean, it doesn't really matter the group size. If you spend any time with him, by the time you're done, you want to run through a wall for him. I mean, he really gets you excited. So, and maybe that's why Rogers hasn't committed to any debates yet. El-Sayed came out of the gate and said, "Hey, let's do 5." which is usually the strategy of the person who's behind. But in this case, and that could be, I mean, the poll that we did with Epic showed him down a little bit, but I think it also shows that's his strength. And he wants to debate Rogers because I think he thinks that if he goes head to head with him a few times, he's actually going to win.
Yeah, Rogers is it's also kind of a surprising choice with Republicans because it harkens back to the type of candidate that Republicans used to choose. And so the that was interesting to me in that that Republicans seem to really go with a choice that seems like familiar and a harken back to maybe the pre Donald Trump days in terms of the Republican Party's way of engaging, way of talking, the way of approaching issues. Not to say that obviously Mike Rogers um, knows how to speak to all different types of audiences, but it does seem like I don't know, for somebody like me who's been around in politics, hard to imagine. It's been 20 years on the political scene in Michigan now. That it seems like familiar in a way that it was back in the even pre-Rick Snyder days of politics. What does that say about where Republicans are today compared to, say, I don't know, in 2016, 2018, 2020, 2022, and these elections where they really were kind of, well, I guess in 2018 and 2022 in particular kind of got clobbered.
Well, you could argue, Brian, that in 2018 they just didn't pick the right candidate for governor.
Yeah, yeah. It has crossed my mind a few times that may have been the case. Um,
But
but be that as it may, I will say though that Gretchen Whitmer has always had impeccable timing, and so in politics, like when she's chosen to run, she could have run in 2014. She waited to 2018, which was a really smart move. Won by 10 points, and then in 2022, won by 10 points again. That is that's it is quite a track record. I want to come back talk about Gretchen Whitmer in a minute in terms of the kind of the power of her endorsement or lack thereof in some cases, but like in spite of her own like high popularity. But in this case, how did you see this as a trend among Republicans, maybe going back to an old winning formula?
well, yeah, I mean, I think they've lost enough. I think Republicans have realized that losing isn't fun, and you can go ahead and die on the vine of your convictions. You can go ahead and nominate somebody like John Gibbs or Matt DePerno or Christina Caramo, and you can go ahead and throw them out there, and you've won the battle as far as being a Republican MAGA ideologue, but you've lost the war in that these people aren't going to win a general election. And so, when you get candidates like Matt DePerno and Christina Caramo who just get just slaughtered in a primary election, it doesn't really, or John Gibbs the same way. Now we got, as far as Republicans are concerned, shoot, we just surrendered a Grand Rapids district to Hillary Scholten, who's now won a couple times. And, losing sucks. And sometimes you got to lose a couple times to realize, you know what? We probably didn't put up the best candidate there in 2022. You know what? Maybe Tom Leonard would have been a better choice. Maybe Vander Lang, I think that was her name, Treader Lang, would have been better for Secretary of State, or anybody would have been better for Secretary of State. And you saw that, in this last convention where Republicans were like, you know what? I guess we probably should do Tony Forlini. And, maybe we should do Doug Lloyd for Attorney General because you know what? We could go in the other direction like we have, but losing's no fun. And so, and I think that's why we got Mike Rogers. And, so if you can get kind of that perfect mix for somebody who is supportive of Donald Trump, but is also kind of somebody that could be palatable to the general electorate, like Mike Rogers. Well, that's what we're going to do because we want to win. So yes, I think it's what the Republicans are shifting toward this time. But the president's popularity is so low. It's I think 33% the last one I saw, and that's lower than what we had in any of his polling that we saw in his first term, and it's the lowest we've had yet in his second term. So Republicans are kind of rock bottom, and if all things were equal with that kind of low popularity, Republicans should take a bath in November. But I think they still hope that they think Abdul is going to be a bit of an anchor for the Democrats in a general election, and they're hoping they can rally off that and Mike Rogers. And isn't that interesting though too, Brian, as we're talking about this, that we're talking about the U.S. Senate race as being the top of the ticket when usually we're talking about the governor's race. I mean, the governor's race has become like the undercard to the U.S. Senate race, and it's usually the other way around.
Yeah, that
And it's
is
because of that national interest.
Yeah, it is right. There's implications on control of the Senate, and people are more and more viewing they're viewing all politics through a national lens, which is not necessarily a good thing. But that is what's happening at the national level is determining how people are voting, even on very, very local elections. So speaking of which, let's get into that governor's race. So in the governor's race, it was kind of the opposite, where Democrats consolidated behind a candidate pretty early, and with all due respect to Sheriff Swanson, who ran against Jocelyn Benson. That was, it never really never materialized into something that looked like a real contest. And then, but on the other side, you had John James and Perry Johnson vying for the Republican nomination. John James ended up securing the president's endorsement and then taking the election. Usually the president's endorsement or Republican primary is enough to win an election, although there was one notable exception in Michigan that was kind of interesting, where a candidate who dropped out because the president endorsed another legislative candidate ended up winning the election, still even dropped out. That was kind of interesting. It's kind of a tangent, but on the governor's election with John James. So John James gets the nomination, member of Congress. He's moved on to run for governor against Jocelyn Benson. It kind of reminds me of this situation where in 4 years ago, so Gretchen Whitmer's running for re-election. Tudor Dixon wins the nomination and doesn't really have the resources or inclination, I'm not sure what, to just go out there and define herself immediately, and ended up kind of getting defined by the governor's team, which was like right on it straight away. And so in this case, how urgent is it for John James to define himself to a national or to a statewide audience, and how quick does he have to prove viability in an environment when just to be blunt about it, money tends to follow the winners, and if people don't think you're going to win, you're going to have a really hard time raising money.
Yeah, you're exactly right. The money does follow the winners. And I think we saw that in the primary, and we're going to see it again. I mean, people want to put their money behind a winner. And what that means for John James is that he's got to share a direction. He's got to be able to tell the public where he wants to take the state. And I'm not quite sure he's done that yet. He's talked a lot about his military background, and he talks a lot about toughness and so forth, but we really haven't seen that vision that you would hope to see in a winning candidate. And it can be as simple as, fix the damn roads, or it could be, the type of messaging we saw with Rick Snyder. It could be something that, like that Granholm put out, but we haven't really seen anything from John James. I think Jocelyn Benson has gradually put out, while you could argue it has warmed over and not necessarily all that inventive, she has put out some type of platform that she's rolled out over time. Perry Johnson, you can say what he will. I mean, he did come up with a shtick. I mean, he did come up with the whole 47-47 thing and eliminating the income tax. It's just that most people didn't buy it or thought it was, too gimmicky and not realistic, but at least he had something. And I don't know if John James has anything yet. And, maybe he will, but up to this point, he's basically just rode on fumes on his runs for U.S. Senate and his term in Congress and the fact that he was supported by the president. He didn't necessarily win it on advertising, didn't spend a lot, and neither did the super PAC on him. He just basically rode this thing on name ID all the way through the primary, and that's fine. But he's got to be able to define himself with some type of agenda in order to generate some type of excitement. And with that, what we've seen though from the public is that the excitement may not necessarily be something that Republicans are used to talking about. Republicans are used to talking about tax cuts. I mean, that's like their go-to. And then there's some social issues that they go ahead and mix in there as well. But it's all about tax cuts. And I'm not quite sure eliminating the income tax is high on the list because folks don't see it as realistic. But instead, affordability seems to be something that people can grab a hold of, and it's holding a grudge on utilities. It's holding a grudge on the healthcare system. It's holding a grudge on utilities and people and big businesses and corporations, air quotes, that are taking advantage of the working people. People are feeling screwed. And it's not by the government, it's by big business and corporations. And that's what Abdul has been able to tap into and why he's been so successful. And that's actually, I think Perry was trying to do that a little bit with the whole data center thing. But I think he got in a little too late and just wasn't able to pivot quick enough. But had he led with that early on, he might have been able to get the ball rolling a little bit faster for him. But
Yeah.
he just got in too late.
It's interesting you bring up like affordability and just kind of generally how people are feeling. And when President Biden's numbers plummeted, it was closely aligned to when incomes were rising at a slower rate than prices. And so you could look at economic statistics as the Biden team often did and say, look, unemployment is low, job growth is up, income is increasing. You don't realize, I mean, everything is great, but people are saying, I don't feel great. Everything feels like it's getting tight, so it was, and then I see the Trump administration falling into the exact same trap where they're pointing to certain economic statistics and people are saying, yeah, but my experience is very frustrating because all of these costs are exploding around me and income isn't keeping up with it. And I never made so much in my life and had so little, people are just feeling that way. And so the idea of candidates coming and saying, look, affordability is the number one issue are the ones that are they're onto something powerful there because they're at least speaking to the experience that people are having, not trying to correct their experience, but instead I remember back it used to be like if somebody was who was it that was describing Bill Clinton, they said, if there was a mob after Bill Clinton, he'd just turn around and lead it like it was a parade. And and so like that's like the idea is that if so people are mad at about rising costs, then just take their side and then and be that and let that carry your message and your agenda. And I think that is a pretty big vulnerability that Republicans have right now is not speaking to that when the Democrats are speaking to that. And so let me throw a hypothetical at you. I'm thinking about the this energy that moved kind of late in the process in the Democratic primary toward progressives. It just seemed like there was energy right up to election. It was building more and more. And in that gubernatorial election where Jocelyn Benson just came out of that primary, like what if Garland Gilchrist had stayed in that election for another couple of months? I mean, do you think that may have been an interesting, when he dropped out, he seemed like he had no chance at all, but I wonder whether or not there was a wave that he just missed out on.
I've wondered the exact same thing, Brian, and I wonder if he wonders that too. I mean, he didn't necessarily have a problem raising money nationally. I mean, he was doing it, just not at the same clip as Jocelyn Benson. And maybe he just didn't have the time or the infrastructure that she did, but it just feels like she out hustled him. But if he had done some things a little differently, maybe if he would have been more aggressive, maybe if he had shown more hustle and strength, could he have been in a position to take advantage of this progressive wave? And I think the answer is yes. I think he could have. I think he could have been in a position to take her out, or at least make it somewhat competitive, which, Swanson didn't make it competitive at all. But I think he got slow out of the gates, and he never really increased the pace at all. He never showed up for Senate session, never. He didn't do a lot of public appearances. So then what was he doing? I mean, if you think, well, gosh, he wasn't in Senate session because he was out campaigning all the time. Well, there really wasn't very much evidence of that. And had there been, I mean, I think he was trying to take over that progressive lane, and he could have taken advantage of it. So yeah, I think you're right, Brian. I think if he had stayed in and put forth a different strategy, I think he was on the right track. I just don't think he showed the hustle Benson did. She ran circles around him, and that's why she basically chased them out when she did.
It does seem like she had just command of that primary from the very first day until the election, and never lost it. It was really quite an impressive an impressive length of time to maintain that level of energy.
Yeah.
Let's finish up with the legislature. So the state legislature now, Democrats control the Senate, Republicans control the House. Both margins are pretty tight. There's not lopsided control on either side. What in the Senate, which races, there's not really that many races probably at play. Which races are really on the table here?
Well, there's two that I think are really on the table. Well, no, I'm going to check that. I'm going to go ahead and say three. We have the ninth district with Mike Weber, who's an incumbent on the Republican side. We've got Mark Huizenga in Grand Rapids, who's fending off his seat against Carol Glanville, another state legislator. That one's going to be super competitive. And so those are two holds that the Republicans have to have if they want to regain majority, or at least the split. They'd also need to win the 13th district with Ryan Berman against Sean Carlson. They need to win that in order to get a 19-19 split, assuming that Weber and Huizenga are able to hold on to their seat. There's a long shot. Shouldn't have been a long shot, but it's becoming one now. In the 12th district with Kevin Hertel. The Republicans just couldn't find a good established quality candidate there. They got somebody named Goldwater, who is somewhat related to Barry Goldwater from the 60s, but not many people even associate that name with that anymore. But he was somebody Weber found. He's an evangelistic preacher, but he's not really a known quantity politically, and he's going to have a tough time in this environment to be successful, especially since Kevin has done a pretty good job of solidifying a base and having a message and getting some things done. The Southbridge Air Force Base, the new fighter mission, he's been able to latch onto that, so that's been helpful. So I don't know if that one's really in play.
His brother's the chair of the Michigan Democratic Party too, so he's not going to want for resources, presumably.
No, they took care of him well in 2022. They actually bailed on a seat that they probably had a better shot at to make sure that Kevin was taken care of, and then Kevin won by, like 400 votes or something, just barely got in, and gave the Democrats the majority on that. But he should be in better shape this go around. One race that I'm actually interested in, I'm going to pull out my election guide here, the MIRS election guide, because I want to make sure I get the names right. I'm curious about Muskegon with Kim Cole. who is the Ludington or the Mason County Sheriff. He is running against somebody named Rebecca Amidon, who is an instructor at a community college there in the west side of the state. And I'm interested in this race because it's an open seat. And it's one that in this type of environment, the Democrats have a shot at. So, I know the Republicans would like to retake majority, but I think that the Democrats may have a better shot at increasing their majority than losing the majority. If you take a look at these Senate districts and how many people participated in the primary, if the number of participants in the primary equal general election votes, which is, you can't really do that, but just say that you could, the Democrats would have 24 seats. They have a 24-14 majority. Now, that doesn't mean that we should all predict that and that Rebecca Amidon is necessarily going to beat the Mason County Sheriff. But what it does say is that the enthusiasm is on the Democratic side and that they do have an advantage going into these races. And maybe not this one, but maybe others like it. And like you said, Brian, there just isn't that many seats that we're drawing competitively. I mean, could you see like John DeMoose in Traverse City? Possibly being in trouble. I don't know. I mean, that seems hard to believe, but the numbers aren't rock solid. And when you have wave election years like 2010 and 2008, and you were a part of those, anything's possible. I mean, seats
Yeah.
you never thought could possibly go, all of a sudden, I'm looking through my MIRS election guide thinking, oh God, I remember we wrote something on this person. Like, who is this person again? I mean, it can happen.
2006, 2008, 2010 all had legislative races that where winners came out ahead that nobody was paying attention to.
It was
And
incredible.
yeah, this does feel like it could be that type of an election. We will have to let that be the last word. We'll have you back on sometime to talk about the state house too. It's pretty interesting also. But Kyle, thanks so much for joining us today. So many different aspects of politics and things that are happening. And for our members, we'll still be on top of it. If you haven't subscribed to the Watchdog, please do. It doesn't cost anything. Sign right up for it. You'll get that once a week in your mailbox. Very interesting articles on mostly state level politics and what's happening that affects small businesses.
All right. Yes. Thanks, Brian and Kyle, for that really in-depth discussion. We look forward to having Kyle back on in the future. I hope you all have a great week. We'll be back here next Monday at 3 o'clock.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.